All right, everybody. In this lecture, we're going to walk through brain injury from a critical care nursing perspective. And one thing I want you to immediately recognize is that brain injuries can deteriorate very quickly. A patient may initially look stable, and then within hours, suddenly decline neurologically. The brain is extremely sensitive to interruption in oxygenation and perfusion. Unlike other tissues, it really does not tolerate hypoxia well. So throughout this lecture, you're going to hear repeated emphasis on preventing secondary injury. We'll discuss different types of brain trauma, including contusions, hematomas, concussions, and diffuse axonal injury. We'll also connect these conditions to assessment findings, ICP changes, Glasgow Coma Scale interpretation, and nursing interventions. From a nursing standpoint, your neuroassessment skills are critical. Small changes in level of consciousness, pupil response, motor movement, or vital signs may be the earliest indicators that the patient is deteriorating. We'll also talk through diagnostics, ICP management, complications like herniation, and the priorities involved in caring for these patients in both the acute and recovery phases. One of the most important concepts in neuronursing is understanding that the brain depends completely on continuous perfusion. The brain does not store oxygen or glucose the way some other tissues can. That means even a brief interruption in blood flow or oxygen delivery can start causing irreversible damage. So when we talk about brain injury, we are not only worried about the initial trauma itself, we are also very concerned about secondary injury. Secondary injury is the cascade that happens after the original insult. Things like cerebral edema, hypoxia, hypotension, and electrolyte imbalances can worsen neurologic damage significantly. For example, if a patient with a traumatic brain injury becomes hypotensive or hypoxic, cerebral perfusion drops further, and brain tissue can become ischemic. This is why aggressive management matters so much in neurocritical care. We want to maintain oxygenation, support blood pressure, control ICP, and prevent anything that worsens cerebral injury. A major nursing priority is early recognition. If the patient becomes more confused, develops worsening headache, declining LOC, abnormal pupils, or respiratory changes, we have to recognize that quickly because deterioration can happen fast. Brain injuries are commonly categorized by both mechanism of injury and distribution of damage. First, we classify injuries as either closed or open. A closed or blunt injury means the skull remains intact, but the force is transmitted internally to the brain tissue. Motor vehicle accidents, falls, and blunt trauma are common examples. An open or penetrating injury means the skull and dura have been breached. Examples include gunshot wounds or penetrating trauma from sharp objects. These injuries increase the risk for infection and direct tissue destruction. We also classify injuries as focal or diffuse. A focal injury is localized to a specific area of the brain. Examples include contusions or hematomas. These patients may present with localized neurologic deficits, depending on the affected brain region. Diffuse stiff injuries involve more widespread damage across the brain. Concussions and diffuse axonal injury are examples. Diffuse axonal injury is especially severe because rotational or shearing forces damage axons throughout the brain, often causing immediate coma and poor neurologic outcomes. As nurses, understanding these classifications helps us anticipate assessment findings, complications, and treatment priorities. Now let's look at the major intracranial hematomas, because these are very high yield and students commonly mix them up. First is the epidural hematoma. This is usually caused by a skull fracture that tears the middle meningeal artery. Since it's arterial bleeding, patients can deteriorate very quickly. The classic presentation is loss of consciousness, followed by a lucid interval, and then rapid neurologic decline. That lucid interval is extremely important to remember. Signs can include confusion, restlessness, fixed pupils, paralysis, and eventually coma. This is a neurosurgical emergency requiring burr holes or craniotomy. Next is the subdural hematoma, which is venous bleeding beneath the dura. Acute subdurals happen after trauma and can also deteriorate rapidly. Chronic subdurals are especially common in older adults because brain atrophy stretches the veins. These may develop slowly over weeks or months and can mimic stroke symptoms or confusion. Then we have intracerebral hemorrhage, which is bleeding directly into the brain tissue itself. Causes include trauma, hypertension, aneurysms, anticoagulants, and vascular malformations. Patients may present with headache and focal neurologic deficits. Treatment focuses on ICP control, supportive care, and surgery when possible. There is a spectrum of brain injury severity. A concussion is considered more of a functional injury. There is temporary neurologic dysfunction without structural damage visible on imaging. Patients can develop headache, confusion, amnesia, or behavioral changes depending on the area affected. One important nursing point is monitoring for red flags like worsening LOC, seizures, persistent headache, vomiting, or neurologic decline, because what initially looks mild can worsen. Repeated concussions are associated with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. A contusion is actual bruising of brain tissue, commonly involving the frontal and temporal lobes due to acceleration-deceleration injuries. Symptoms can include confusion, stupor, and loss of consciousness. Temporal lobe contusions are especially dangerous because swelling can increase ICP and trigger herniation. Diffuse axonal injury, or DAI, is much more severe. Rotational or shearing forces damage axons throughout the brain. These patients often present with immediate coma, abnormal posturing, and significant cerebral edema. Prognosis is generally poor because the damage is diffuse rather than localized. Neurologic assessment is one of the most important responsibilities in neuronursing because subtle changes may be the first sign of deterioration. The single most sensitive indicator of neurologic status is level of consciousness. If the patient becomes more lethargic, confused, difficult to arouse, or less responsive, we take that very seriously. The Glasgow Coma Scale evaluates eye-opening, verbal response, and motor response. Scores range from 3 to 15, and a score of 8 or less indicates severe brain injury. Pupil assessment is also critical. Unequal pupils or unilateral dilation may indicate expanding hematoma or herniation. Fixed and dilated pupils are a very concerning sign and often indicate severe neurologic compromise. Motor assessment includes checking spontaneous movement, strength, and response to pain. We also monitor for abnormal posturing, which can indicate worsening brain injury. And remember, neurochecks are never just a task. Trends matter. A small change from baseline can signal a major neurologic emergency. Cushing's Triad is a major neuroemergency and a very important NCLEX concept. It is the classic sign of increasing intracranial pressure with impending brainstem herniation. The three findings are increased systolic blood pressure with widening pulse pressure, bradycardia, and irregular respirations. What's important is recognizing that this is a late sign. By the time you see all three together, the brain is already struggling to compensate for rising ICP. This patient requires immediate intervention. We need rapid neurologic assessment, airway and oxygenation support, ICP management, and provider notification immediately. In clinical practice, if you see worsening LOC along with abnormal pupils and changes in vital signs, you should already be highly concerned before the full triad even develops. Medical management of brain injury focuses heavily on preventing secondary injury and stabilizing the patient quickly. First, we always assume cervical spine injury until the spine is formally cleared. That's extremely important in trauma patients. Diagnostics usually include rapid CT imaging first because we need to identify bleeding, swelling, fractures, or mass effect quickly. MRI may provide more detailed information later. Treatment can include surgical evacuation of clots, repair of fractures, ICP monitoring, and CSF drainage. Patients may also require ventilatory support, seizure prophylaxis, sedation, fluid and electrolyte management, and nutritional support. The overall goal is maintaining oxygenation and cerebral perfusion while preventing further neurologic damage. And finally, brain death is defined very specifically as coma, absence of brainstem reflexes, and apnea. Nursing interventions directly affect ICP and cerebral perfusion pressure. One of the simplest but most effective interventions is positioning. We typically elevate the head of the bed about 30 degrees and keep the neck in neutral alignment. This promotes venous drainage from the brain and helps reduce ICP. We also avoid anything that increases intrathoracic or intra-abdominal pressure, such as straining, coughing excessively, or Valsalva maneuvers, because these can increase intracranial pressure. Oxygenation is another priority because hypoxia worsens secondary brain injury very quickly. Temperature control matters too. Fever increases the brain's metabolic demand, so treating hyperthermia is important. Sedation may also be used to reduce agitation and decrease metabolic demand on the injured brain. So in neurocritical care, even seemingly basic nursing actions can significantly affect patient outcomes. In neurocritical care, we are not just treating the brain itself, we are also preventing systemic problems that can worsen neurologic injury. Airway management is a major priority. We position carefully, suction when needed, prevent aspiration, and monitor ABGs because hypoxia can rapidly worsen brain injury. Fluid and electrolyte monitoring is also extremely important. We closely monitor sodium, osmolality, and glucose levels. Patients with brain injury are at risk for SIADH and diabetes insipidus, which can create serious fluid imbalances. Nutrition should begin early whenever possible, because these patients often have very high metabolic demands and require increased protein and calories for healing. We also aggressively treat fevers because hyperthermia increases cerebral metabolic demand. At the same time, we try to prevent shivering because shivering itself can increase oxygen consumption and ICP. And finally, safety and skincare remain essential. We minimize environmental stimulation, avoid unnecessary restraints when possible, reposition frequently, and protect skin integrity. One of the biggest concerns after a primary brain injury is the development of secondary complications. Hemodynamically, decreased cerebral perfusion pressure can lead to cerebral ischemia and hypoxia. Remember, if CPP drops too low, the brain simply does not receive enough blood flow. Respiratory complications are also common. Patients with impaired ventilation are at risk for pneumonia and acute respiratory distress syndrome, especially if they require prolonged mechanical ventilation. Neurologically, cerebral edema and brainstem herniation are major concerns, and swelling often peaks around 48 to 72 hours after injury. Patients are also at risk for post-traumatic seizures, which may occur immediately, early, or even later after the injury. Metabolic complications include SIADH, diabetes insipidus, hyperglycemia, and electrolyte abnormalities like hypokalemia. This is why ongoing monitoring is so important in neuro patients, because complications can develop rapidly, even after the initial injury seems stable. Recovery from brain injury is often a long-term process that extends well beyond the ICU or hospital stay. Many patients experience memory problems, impulsivity, slowed processing, emotional lability, or behavioral changes that affect daily functioning and relationships. Rehabilitation may involve neuropsychology, cognitive retraining, behavior modification, speech therapy, occupational therapy, and physical therapy, depending on the deficits present. Families also experience significant stress because roles often change suddenly. Caregivers may feel overwhelmed emotionally, financially, and physically. Education is very important during transitional care. Patients and families need to understand potential late complications, such as seizures, infections, and ongoing neurologic deficits. The overall goal is maximizing independence, supporting adaptation, and helping both the patient and family adjust to life after brain injury. When we look at expected outcomes in patients with brain injury, we're really evaluating whether the patient is stabilizing both physiologically and neurologically. Physiologically, we want to see effective airway clearance, adequate oxygenation, balanced fluids and electrolytes, stable temperature, good nutrition, and intact skin integrity. Neurologically, we want to prevent additional injury and control seizures if they occur. We also look for improvement in orientation, cognition, sleep-wake cycles, and overall coping ability. Recovery is not only physical. Emotional and psychosocial recovery are important too, both for the patient and the family. Family adaptation matters because brain injury can dramatically change roles and long-term functioning. And finally, one of the biggest indicators of progress is active participation in rehabilitation, because recovery from brain injury is often a gradual process, requiring ongoing therapy and support. Let's finish with the major high-yield nursing points from this lecture. First, remember that the brain has no oxygen or glucose reserve, so preventing secondary injury is a top priority. Hypoxia and hypotension can rapidly worsen neurologic damage. Level of consciousness is the most sensitive indicator of neurologic status. A subtle change in LOC may be the earliest sign of deterioration. Know the Glasgow Coma Scale. A score of 8 or less indicates severe brain injury. Recognize the classic epidural hematoma pattern: loss of consciousness, lucid interval, then rapid decline. Know Cushing's triad: increased systolic blood pressure, bradycardia, and irregular respirations. This is a late sign of increased ICP and impending herniation. For ICP management, maintain HOB around 30 degrees, keep the neck midline, avoid valsalva and straining, maintain oxygenation, control fever, and reduce agitation. Monitor pupils carefully. Unilateral dilation may indicate expanding hematoma or herniation. Fixed dilated pupils are a very concerning finding. Watch for SIADH and diabetes insipidus in neuropatients by monitoring sodium, osmolality, urine output, and fluid balance closely. And finally, always remember that trends matter in neuronursing. Repeated neuroassessments are critical because patients can deteriorate very quickly.